How could a pastor become involved in an assassination plot against a feared individual? Well, that is the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was involved in the plot to kill Adolf Hitler. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Brandon Foster, and I am a novice historian who primarily focuses on the Germanic histories. This is history of Germany, France, England, Scandinavia, going from around the 1st century AD all the way up to the present time. And today you are watching History of. Now, Bonhoeffer was an individual who lived in the early 20th century. In fact, he was born on February 4th, 1906, and he was born to a very loving and large family. Not only was his family large, but he had many siblings, and those siblings and his other relatives lived in a local area, and they were all very involved with each other. He had a twin sister named Sabine, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and his parents were Paula and Karl, Karl being a very strong German name. Now they were very German, they were full-blood German, and they were a very proud German family. They loved their nation, they loved their Kaiser, and they were willing to participate in the growth of Germany. So much so that Bonhoeffer's older siblings, two of his older brothers, went to war during World War I. Unfortunately, one would not return, and this would impact a young Bonhoeffer quite a bit. His family was not very religious in any form, but his mother had some religiousness to her. And what I mean is that she had family members that were part of the Lutheran clergy and the clergy in Germany. But outside of that, there wasn't much spirituality. Paula would raise Bonhoeffer and her children with some form of religious kind of honor. She believed that it was important, but it wasn't something that they focused on quite a lot. Which is why, when at the age of about 14, when Bonhoeffer decided that he was going to become a theologian, this was a shock to most of his siblings, though not to his mother. Most of them thought that he might either A, follow their father's path as a renowned psychologist, or even more so, he would become a pianist, because he was a very strong piano player even at a young age. He started around the age of 8 where he was playing music, and they thought that he might be sort of prodigy and that he was going to continue on with music. And while he would play music his entire life, he didn't continue it as a career. Being part of a upper class or middle upper class family allowed Bonhoeffer the opportunity to go to school for the majority of his youth. He would attend the local school near him. He would actually walk to school for parts of his life. And eventually, when he was old enough, he would attend university. At the age of 17, he went to the University of Tübingen, and then eventually he would go to Berlin. He would be there until 1927, when he would graduate with his doctorate. Now, to get his doctorate, he had to write a dissertation, of course. So he wrote his on the Communion of Saints, which is not a book I have actually read, though I've read most of what he has, and that is what gained him his doctorate. While he was there, he was influenced by such men as Harnack, Seeberg, Hole, and of course Barth, who was his main kind of influence. Then, after he graduated from university, he became an assistant pastor in Barcelona for 1 year. While there, he was able to start gaining the skills and the knowledge that would start helping him as a pastor and, as you'll see later, as a kind of revolutionary and assassin. Also during this time, after his 1 year stint in Barcelona, he would also he would go to New York as a kind of exchange student slash just kind of to learn and grow. It was part of an exchange student program. He would go to the Union Theological Seminary. He'd be there also for 1 year between 1930 and 1931. While he was at Union, he would be impacted by two primary men. One was Lesser, who was a French pacifist, and the other was a man by the name of Fisher. Now, Fisher was a black student who was at the school with him, and out of the two, I think he would have a larger impact on Bonhoeffer. Now, Lesser challenged the way that Bonhoeffer saw the Sermon on the Mount, especially when it came to peace, love, and kind of this idea of universality. Bonhoeffer, growing up in a German upper-class family, was very nationalistic when he was younger towards Germany. Again, his family fought during World War I. But as time went on, the family would become less nationalistic as Germany moved in a different direction. Now, Bonhoeffer's time in the United States would also impact his thought on this whole nationalistic idea. Not that he was ever against the idea of Germany. He loved his nation, he loved his people, he loved his countrymen, but he believed as a Christian that it was imperative that believers think in a more universal and international way than just in nationalistic thought. Then, with his friend Fisher, who again I said had a larger impact, I believe, on him, and this is because being a black American, Fisher was able to escort him into the black community. Now, Germany did not have a large black community, so this was not something that he had ever had the opportunity to experience. Also, again, being in the upper echelon of German society, he interacted with generally two different kinds of people, Germans and Jews. Outside of that, there was not a lot of other ethnic groups that he had the opportunity to interact with, at least not that I have read. Interacting with Fisher and going to Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance and kind of the peak of the Black Enlightenment that was going on in America during this time, he was able to see the world through different eyes. And he saw the life of people that actually lived more oppressed. He saw what they were like, the passion they could have. And he was very influenced, and he loved how much fire he saw within the black community. It was something he wished he could bottle up and take back to Germany. He said while the Germans might have theology, he said the blacks had passion, and out of the two, he wished he had the latter. During this whole period in the United States, he had an awakening towards the ecumenical and international movements, which I've talked about. And this would become part of the overarching theme of his writing. Everything he wrote had something to do with this idea of becoming more for Christ through service and love of people. And this would be a really important thing that would happen. Shortly after this, as if you know your World War II history, shortly after he would come back to Germany, Adolf Hitler would rise to power in 1933. His family was, Bonhoeffer's family, was very anti-Hitler. They were very scared and nervous about what he was going to do. He rose on this National Socialistic platform, and he was very nationalistic and very racist. He had zero desire to incorporate other people groups, and he wanted to create, as they always talk about, the Aryan white national world. And unfortunately, too many Christians, or people who claim to be Christian in Germany, would follow along. And this would become a contentious point for both Bonhoeffer and other Christians, and an area that Hitler would latch onto so that he could solidify his power and incorporate both the political and the religious. Though he did himself despise religion, he despised Christianity, and Hitler, if he truly had his way, would have eradicated it all. But he saw them as useful tools at the moment, and he was willing to utilize them. So, during the early reign of Hitler, so again starting in 1933, Bonhoeffer would actually start speaking out against the National Socialist movement, also called the Nazis. And at first, he was able to communicate over radio and during his talks and sermons. He was able to do so. But as time would go on, the grip that the Nazis had on Germany would slowly tighten, and he had to be much more careful over time of how he would talk. During this time, at the very beginning, before the Nazis started clenching, Bonhoeffer was able to write The Church and the Jewish Question, because again, that was the main topic at that time. What should the Jews be allowed to do? Should they be allowed to be in anything, or was Germany for Germans? That was the main question. And the Aryans knew the answer. The Nazis knew how they wanted to answer that, but they had to be very careful about the middleman and how to get them into the Nazi camp. And they were very good at what they did. Also during this time, Bonhoeffer would join the Pastors' Emergency League. This was a league that was trying to unite international pastors to move forward in this international Christian movement, and especially to move away from the national racist church that Hitler was trying to create. He would meet a man by the name of George Bell. Now this was a bishop in England, and they'd become good friends, and they would help each other in this movement and towards the end of Hitler. As time would go on, the confessing church would begin, and this would be kind of the anti-German church. During that time, there would be something called the Kutschenkampf, which was basically the church struggle, the church war. And this was because Hitler was trying to create a national church, and Bonhoeffer and his other pastors were trying to create an international church that was focused on Christ, while Hitler's church was focused on the Führer and kind of the Nazi movement. He would lead a seminary in Finkelwald, and this is when Bonhoeffer would be able to kind of focus on his pastorship and discipling a core group of young men who would be able to kind of dig deep into their lives and become strong men for Christ. He also wrote the book of Discipleship, and this was one of his most famous books to this day. And he said that this is an astute, political, informed call to live vicariously and suffer vicariously on behalf of others in commitment and obedience to Christ. So he's saying to be a Christian, you needed to focus on Christ, and by focusing on Christ, you were going to love those around you. This was his big thing. In 1939, Bonhoeffer would flee shortly to the United States as persecution in Germany would rise, but it would not last very long. He would go there in June, and he'd be back in July because he did not believe that he should stay. He thought it was his call to stay in Germany and help pastors, Christians, and Jews where he could. At a conference in Fano, Denmark, Bonhoeffer would declare that it's either National Socialism or Christ. You cannot have both. Too many German Christians were trying to say that they were one and the same and that it was easy to have both, which shows how easy it is to slip into a nationalistic mindset and to shrink Christ into your box. Unfortunately, this was a kind of, again, a show of how bad the church has gotten. The German Christian faith movement was an anti-Semitic, nationalistic church that wanted a racially pure congregation. They wanted the clergy and the people to all be racially pure, aka Germans. This was called the Reichskirche, as in Reich, the Third Reich, the Empire Church. And it would have 28 Landskirches, which were kind of the smaller groups that were a part of it. This would officially lead Bonhoeffer into the coup that would kind of cement both his end and his fame. The group of people were part of the German Intelligence Association, and they, because of two generals, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris and General Hans Oster, they were trying to end Hitler. They thought that he was going too far, he was reckless, he was radical, and he was going to be the downfall of Germany, which in some ways he would kind of be. So they wanted to end him. They wanted to assassinate him to end the insanity. And so they gathered a core group of men, Bonhoeffer being one of them, and this was their sole purpose, at least, was to again assassinate Hitler. And they tried on multiple occasions. They set a bomb in a briefcase under the table. It didn't work. They tried to put a bomb on a plane. It also would not work. And as attempt after attempt would fail, it became harder and harder because Hitler became more and more paranoid. On top of all that, the longer a conspiracy goes on, the sooner it might get found out, which is eventually what happened. Bonhoeffer would become imprisoned because of some clerical, they figured out that something was going on, and they put him in prison based off of that information. They didn't know he was a part of a coup. They didn't know that he was trying to assassinate him, but they knew that he was doing illegal things. So he was held in prison for multiple years because of that. So on April 5th, 1943, Bonhoeffer was arrested because his involvement in the Abwehr, which is the organization, the German intelligence agency, that's what it's called. And he was taken to Tegel prison in Berlin. And he was held there for about 2 years, where he wrote many letters to his family, his friends, and to his fiancée at that time. And these are called letters from prison. We have a collection of these letters, and they're some of the deepest and profound kind of thoughts of Bonhoeffer. He was struggling through a lot of things, and they really unlock the way he was thinking. Unfortunately, during this time, the coup was uncovered on July 20th, 1944. So a year later, the assassination plots, the documentation that they had left as they were corresponding to each other, these letters and such would be found, and among them was Bonhoeffer's name, and he would be connected completely to the assassination attempts. A year later, on April 9th, the 39-year-old Bonhoeffer would be taken to, or had been taken to Flossenburg concentration camp, and on that day he would be led to the gallows, completely naked, and he would be hung. Now this is something that he knew was coming, something he knew was inevitable or very possible when he joined the coup, and it was something that he was willing. Unfortunately, also during that same week, his brother Klaus, his brother-in-law Donenny, and Schleicher, sorry, these German names are sometimes difficult to say, were also executed during that same week. This was a very bad week for the Bonhoeffer family and for humanity in general. And it wouldn't be until months later that the Bonhoeffers would find out that their son Diedrich was executed, and unfortunately it was multiple weeks before the camp was liberated by the Allied forces. So this is a story of Bonhoeffer and his willingness to stand up against tyranny, oppression, and persecution. And he is a symbol and a light to anyone, and Christians specifically, of how a Christian is supposed to stand up and fight not just for the souls of the future, but also the people in the present. And he is someone that is a huge influence in my life and someone that I try and replicate every day. If you enjoy history, especially German history, again, German history spans Germany, France, England, and Scandinavia, going from 100 AD to the present. If you enjoy any of this, then leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the things. And until next time, peace.